Avi Melamed, Middle East Geopolitical Intelligence analyst. Thanks so much for your time. So Hamas is obviously much bigger than just Yahya Sinwar, but how important is the killing of Sinwar in the next steps in this war?
Well, Sinwar, of course, was a key figure in Hamas, particularly in the last couple of decades. He was the person, in the end of the day, that was dictating the hawkish line within Hamas. He was the one basically responsible for the building of Hamas military power as a Din al-Qassam brigade in the last couple of decades. And as we all know, he was the architect of the October 7 massacre. The removal of Sinwar from the scene has two immediate impacts, which could be interesting and significant. One, in the context of the hostages, because Sinwar was blocking all the time any kind of like progress, because he wasn't incentivized to release hostages for his own reasons. And the second thing, as long as Sinwar was in power, he was able to suffocate any other voice in Gaza Strip that will challenge his path. Now that he's removed, it will be interesting to see what will be the impact on those two aspects.
Yeah, and we heard US President Joe Biden using Sinwar's death to call for a new ceasefire deal and renewing those calls. How likely is that to happen now that Sinwar is gone? And how likely are the hostages to be released?
Well, the first thing that we have to bear in mind is that the hostages held in Gaza Strip, kidnapped by Hamas in October 7, about now it's 101 people, are held by different people in Gaza Strip. Some of them are being held by Hamas militants, some of them are being held by citizens, quote unquote, if you wish to use this term, people from Gaza. And so there is no clear information about the whereabouts. Other than that, it's very difficult to understand if there is any kind of like one factor that could actually be responsible, sort of speaking, to move forward with negotiations that will bring the release of all the hostages and bring them back to Israel. As you probably know, according to the estimations, it is estimated that the considerable number of the hostages are not alive anymore, and probably the rest who are alive are in a very, very bad condition. And so there is an expectation that following the killing of Sinwar, there will be a breakthrough towards any kind of a deal that will release the hostages. At the time being, it's very vague. It's not so clear. It seems like there are some players in the region that do have interest and do have the ability to put pressure on Hamas to move forward towards such a deal, and maybe that will be the process. However, I would say that the bottom line is that we could not expect, unfortunately, to the immediate release of all the hostages for those reasons that I just mentioned.
More broadly, across the region, we're hearing that Hezbollah, in light of Yahya Sinwar's death, is going to intensify its attacks on Israel. What does this mean more broadly, the death of Yahya Sinwar and the fact that both Hamas and Hezbollah, now a lot of their leadership has been killed? What does this mean more broadly for the so-called axis of resistance in the Middle East?
Well, you mentioned the axis of resistance, which is very significant. Just a few background. The axis of resistance is a network of armies of terror that is supported, armed, and financed by the Mullah regime in Tehran. That axis includes, you mentioned, Hezbollah, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Iraqi Shiite militias, Houthis in Yemen, and others. Indeed, following the last year, we could see today that the axis of resistance has sustained some very significant blows because of the war between Israel and Hamas, Israel and Hezbollah. And at this moment, we see a weakening of this axis. This is a good news for the people of the region because the axis of resistance inflicted an enormous death and destruction across the Middle East. Yemen, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Gaza Strip, Israelis all paid the terrible price of the axis of resistance, terror, and radical ideology. In that regard, I would mention that unfortunately there are some people in the West who mistakenly romanticize axis of resistance, failing to understand that actually we are looking at one of the most radical, murderous, ideological and operational axis that exist and that inflicted a lot of damage to the people of the Middle East. So right now, as we see the weakening of the axis of resistance, for example, the Lebanese that have been urging Hezbollah not to drag them to a war, but he, of course, ignored their calls. The Lebanese are now calling and demanding Hezbollah to disarm itself. This is an opportunity for the Lebanese maybe to try and to restore their stolen sovereignty. They were basically occupied in a remote control by Iran and Hezbollah. Maybe for the Palestinians, it's finally an opportunity to take another path other than the disastrous path that Hamas has dictated upon them particularly since Hamas took over Gaza Strip in 2007. So right now it's a moment of an opportunity because the more the axis of resistance is weakened, the best are the odds for more stability for the people of the region. This is the equation and that has to be internalized.
All right, Avi Melamed, we have to leave it there, but we appreciate your time and insights today.
Thank you for having me. Have a good day.
Avi Melamed is a Middle East geopolitical intelligence analyst.